July 10th, 1943. 2:57 hours. Gela Beach, Sicily. The sea is black and uneasy, slapping against the hulls of landing craft as they nose toward the Sicilian coast. Engines idle low. Men crouch shoulder to shoulder, helmets pulled down, rifles clutched tight. Somewhere ahead, the shoreline is invisible, but it's there, waiting. Staff Sergeant Tom Weaver, 16th Infantry Regiment, presses his back against the cold steel wall of the craft. Sweat runs down his spine despite the night air. He checks his watch again. He doesn't know why. Time feels thick out here, like it's resisting movement. 2 minutes, someone shouts. Weaver swallows. Around him, boys barely out of Kansas, Ohio, Brooklyn shift their weight, muttering prayers, jokes that don't land. They've been called a lot of things since they crossed the Atlantic. Soft, unblooded, fat Americans who fold under fire. Italian newspapers back home had written it openly. Officers laughed about it in mess halls. Even German advisors scoffed, said Americans relied on gadgets, not guts. Tonight, the coast of Sicily is about to test that idea. The ramp slams down. Machine gun fire immediately tears into the water, red tracers stitching the surf. Men spill forward anyway, boots hitting waves, packs dragging them down. Weaver stumbles, regains balance, forces himself forward as rounds snap overhead. Move! Move! An officer yells. They move. Not clean, not graceful, but they move. Behind them, offshore, something far bigger wakes up. A low, rolling thunder builds, not from the sky, but from the sea itself. American destroyers open fire. 6-inch naval guns hammer the coastline, each blast lighting the horizon in brief white flashes. The beach shakes. Sand jumps. Concrete pillboxes disappear into smoke. Weaver hits the sand hard, gasping. He presses his face into the grit, waiting for the next burst of fire. It doesn't come. Instead, more thunder. Closer now. He lifts his head just in time to see a line of explosions walk up a hillside inland, precise, methodical. Artillery. American artillery. Behind the beach, guns have already been set. Fast. Efficient. No ceremony. Forward observers call corrections over the radio like they're ordering coffee. Left 50. Drop 200. Fire for effect. The hillside erupts. Up on a rocky rise overlooking the beach, Capitano Luigi Ferraro, Italian coastal defense, lowers his binoculars slowly. His ears ring. Dust coats his uniform. The men around him stare in disbelief. That was naval fire, one lieutenant says. Ferraro nods, jaw tight. And artillery, he adds. Heavy. This wasn't supposed to happen like this. Italian intelligence had said the Americans would hesitate under fire, but they lacked stomach. That once pinned, they'd stall long enough for counterattacks to crush them. But Ferraro watches American infantry keep coming, imperfect, scattered, but relentless, while shells tear apart every position he thought was secure. Radio crackles in his hand. Command post hit. Telephone lines gone. German batteries silenced. Ferraro grips the handset harder. They haven't even pushed inland yet, he mutters. On the beach, Weaver crawls to a shingle bank, heart pounding. A Sherman tank grinds past him, water pouring off its hull, cannon already barking toward unseen targets. Above, aircraft scream overhead. P-40s diving low, guns flashing, bombs skipping across roads and intersections beyond the beach. Weaver realizes something in that moment, something nobody told him in training. This isn't bravery alone. This is weight. Firepower stacked on firepower, moving forward without pause. He gets to his knees, then his feet. Let's go, he shouts, surprising himself. Around him, the line surges again. And up on the ridge, Capitano Ferraro watches the coastline vanish under smoke and flame and understands, too late, that the joke is over. These Americans aren't soft. They're coming with everything at once. July 10th, 1943. 6:21 hours. Outside Gela, Sicily. Dawn breaks reluctantly over the Sicilian hills, light creeping in behind a curtain of smoke. The beachhead is already loud. Engines shouted orders, the clank of armor, But inland, the noise becomes something else entirely. Deeper, heavier, like the land itself is groaning. Staff Sergeant Tom Weaver moves with his squad along a shallow irrigation ditch, boots slipping in mud churned up by shell fire. The smell is sharp, cordite, crushed vegetation, hot metal. Somewhere ahead, Italian positions cling to the high ground. Stone farmhouses turned into bunkers, olive groves riddled with trenches. A lieutenant drops beside Weaver, map flapping. "Orders just came down," he says. "We push now. Artillery's already walking it in." Weaver nods, heart hammering. He peers over the ditch. The hillside ahead explodes. Not one blast. A pattern. A deliberate ladder of destruction climbing the slope in perfect intervals. Trees snap. Stone walls collapse. Dirt geysers into the air and doesn't come back down right away. American guns are finding their rhythm. Behind them, miles back now, 105 millimeters and 155 millimeters howitzers sit wheel to wheel, firing as fast as crews can load. Forward observers crouch with radios pressed to their ears, calm voices slicing through the chaos. Target reference barn with red roof. At 100, fire for effect. The reply is instant. On the Italian side, Capitano Luigi Ferraro stumbles down a rocky path toward what's left of his command post. His boots slide on loose stone. His helmet is gone. Blood trickles from a cut near his temple. This isn't how it's supposed to feel. Italian doctrine taught that artillery was preparation, brief, blunt, then infantry moved in. What Ferraro is seeing is different. The fire doesn't stop. It presses. It moves with the Americans, shielding them like a rolling wall. A corporal runs up, eyes wide. "Signore, the Americans." He gestures helplessly toward the hills. "Every time we move, more shells fall." Ferraro clenches his jaw. "German support?" he asks. The corporal shakes his head. "Radio contact lost." Ferraro looks back toward the coast. Warships sit offshore like dark shapes against the morning glare, their guns still speaking in slow, devastating intervals. He understands now, this isn't just an invasion force. It's an orchestra, and every instrument is playing at once. Back in the ditch, Weaver hears a whistle scream overhead. He flinches instinctively, then feels the concussion ripple through his chest as the round detonates well past them. "Friendly," someone mutters. Weaver lets out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. "That's our stuff," another GI says with a grin. "Hell of a wake-up call, huh?" They move, not charging, not sprinting, advancing behind the thunder, step by step, rifles up, confidence growing with every explosion that lands ahead of them, not on top of them. An Italian machine gun opens up from a stone farmhouse. It fires for maybe 5 seconds. A radio crackles. Coordinates are shouted. Less than a minute later, a shell punches straight through the roof. The gun goes silent forever. Weaver stares. "That fast," he whispers. The lieutenant doesn't look surprised. "Yeah," he says. "That's how we do it." Up the hill, Ferraro drops to his knees as another barrage rips across his position. He presses his face into the dirt, teeth clenched, ears ringing. This is not hesitation. This is not softness. This is pressure, unceasing, mathematical, crushing. He thinks of the articles he read months ago, mocking Americans as slow, indulgent, reliant on comfort. He almost laughs now, a bitter sound swallowed by another blast. Comfort has nothing to do with this. What the Americans brought to Sicily is something else entirely. They brought certainty, and as the hills around Gela burn under precise, relentless fire, Ferraro realizes the truth spreading through every Axis position on the island. Once American guns lock on, there is no pause long enough to breathe. July 10th, 1943, 11:44 hours. Ridgeline above Gela, Sicily. The sun climbs higher, baking the hills into a shimmering haze. Smoke hangs low, clinging to the folds of the terrain like a second skin. What little shade exists is torn apart by shell fire before it can offer comfort. Staff Sergeant Tom Weaver crouches behind a low stone wall, helmet knocked askew, face smeared with dust and sweat. His squad pauses only because the barrage ahead has surged forward again. Another lift, another invisible hand pushing destruction uphill. He watches the explosions carefully now. They aren't random. They aren't angry. They are timed. Every few minutes, the fire crawls another 100 yards. And every time it does, the Americans move right behind it, close enough to feel the heat, far enough to stay alive. This ain't a fight, one GI mutters beside him. It's a schedule. Weaver almost laughs. Up the ridge, Capitano Luigi Ferraro scrambles between shattered olive trees, trying to pull his remaining men together. His unit is no longer a unit, just clusters of survivors, radios dead, officers missing, orders meaningless. An Italian lieutenant shouts over the noise. Signore, the Americans, why do they not stop firing? Ferraro doesn't answer right away, because he's asking himself the same question. Italian and German doctrine both assumed firepower had limits, ammunition shortages, fatigue, coordination breakdowns. You endured the barrage, then counterattacked. But this barrage doesn't end. It hands off. Naval guns ease off as field artillery takes over. Field artillery shifts as fighter bombers roar in low, strafing roads and crossroads behind the front. Mortars fill the gaps. No silence. No breathing room. Ferraro presses his back against a rock as another wave of shells slams into the slope ahead. He realizes something cold and terrifying. The Americans are not fighting this battle emotionally. They are executing it. Down below, Weaver receives the order. All right, go. Go. The squad surges forward, boots crunching over shattered stone and broken branches. They encounter an Italian trench line. Empty. Rifles abandoned. Packs dropped. They ran, someone says. Weaver shakes his head. No, he replies. They got crushed. Ahead, a lone Italian machine gun fires in desperation. Before Weaver can even raise his rifle, a Sherman tank crests a rise, turret already traversing. Boom! The gun position vanishes in dust. Weaver stares at the tank crew, calm inside their steel shell, already scanning for the next target. They told us Italians were weak, he mutters. The lieutenant hears him. Doesn't matter, he says. Firepower, don't care who you are. On the ridge, Ferraro watches American infantry fan out methodically, tanks nosing forward behind them, radios everywhere. He sees officers talking into handsets, pointing, not shouting. Each gesture brings death exactly where it's needed. Ferraro thinks back to the mess hall in Naples months earlier, when German advisors joked about Americans. They fight like merchants, someone had said. Too careful. Too slow. Ferraro understands the mistake now. Careful doesn't mean hesitant. Careful means measured. And measured means repeatable. A runner reaches him, breathless. Signore, the Germans say we must hold. Counterattack at once. Ferraro looks at the slope below, now a wasteland of craters and smoke. American guns already shifting again. With what? He asks quietly. The runner has no answer. As another barrage begins, closer this time, Ferraro finally understands what makes this different from every battle he's fought before. You cannot scare this enemy. You cannot exhaust them. You cannot wait them out. Because they aren't pushing forward on courage alone. They're advancing on math. Shells per minute. Rounds per target. Minutes per objective. And once those numbers are set, the result is inevitable. Ferraro lowers his head as the ground trembles again. The mockery is gone now, replaced by something far worse. Respect and fear. July 11th, 1943. For 12 hours. Near the Ponte d'Arillo, Sicily. Night should bring relief. Instead, it brings precision. Under a moonless sky, the air vibrates with a low, constant rumble. American trucks moving up ammunition, tanks repositioning, artillery crews rotating shifts like factory workers punching a clock. There is no lull, just a change in lighting. Staff Sergeant Tom Weaver lies in a shallow foxhole, helmet tipped back, eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. Tracers arc occasionally, brief red scratches across the black. Somewhere out there, Italian units are trying to regroup. They don't get far. A flare pops overhead, bathing the river crossing in cold white light. Almost instantly, artillery answers. Shells crash down on the far bank with brutal accuracy, water and mud thrown skyward in violent fountains. Jesus, Weaver whispers. They didn't even move yet. His platoon leader crouches beside him. They were thinking about it, he says. That's enough. Across the river, Capitano Luigi Ferraro stares in disbelief as another attempt at forming a defensive line collapses before it exists. His men scatter, some diving for cover, others simply freezing in place. This is the difference now. There is no trial-and-error phase. Every movement is punished immediately. Ferraro grips his binoculars and watches American artillery fire walk backward and forward along likely assembly points, roads, bridges, tree lanes, like an invisible net tightening. They are firing at ideas, he murmurs, not positions. A sergeant beside him looks confused. Ferraro doesn't explain. How do you explain an enemy that anticipates behavior, not action? On the American side, radios crackle softly. Bridge approach neutralized. Enemy movement suppressed. Fire complete. The voices are calm, almost bored. Weaver hears the order come down the line. Hold here. They're done. And just like that, the firing eases. Not stops. Eases. Guns shift elsewhere, already hunting the next threat. Weaver sits up slowly, ears ringing. That's it, he asks. For now, the lieutenant replies. They won't try again tonight. Weaver looks across the river at the shattered ground, the smoke drifting lazily. How do you know? The lieutenant shrugs. Because nobody survives a second lesson. Ferraro does survive. Barely. At dawn, he stands with what's left of his command, less than half strength, listening to reports filtering in from across Sicily. Units collapsing. Positions abandoned. German formations pulling back without Italian coordination. And then the rumors. Rome is talking. The king is talking. The war is changing. Ferraro knows why. It isn't because Italian soldiers lack courage. He's seen men fight bravely, die stubbornly. But courage doesn't matter when the ground itself turns hostile. By midday, American columns push inland almost unopposed, their artillery leapfrogging forward, air cover constant overhead. Every counterattack dissolves before it forms. Ferraro watches a column of American trucks roll past a ruined crossroads, soldiers relaxed, smoking, laughing, soft by the old definition. But behind them, guns are already set, loaded, aimed, waiting. Ferraro removes his helmet and sets it on the ground. He finally understands the truth spreading upward through the Italian command structure. This war cannot be won this way. Not against an enemy who turns firepower into routine. Not against an army that treats destruction as a process, not an event. That realization, more than bombs, more than bullets, is what begins to tear Italy away from the Axis. Because when mockery dies, loyalty soon follows. September 9th, 1943. 5:58 hours. Hills above Salerno, Italy. The mountains loom dark and jagged against the pale edge of dawn. Narrow roads snake upward through olive groves and stone villages, perfect terrain, on paper, for defense. Steep slopes, limited approaches, high ground that favors the man waiting with a rifle. Italian officers once believed this landscape would finally expose American weakness. Staff Sergeant Tom Weaver moves uphill with his platoon, boots scraping rock, breath fogging in the cool morning air. The terrain is tighter here than Sicily, less room to maneuver, more blind corners. This place ought to bleed us, a GI mutters. Weaver doesn't answer. He's listening, not to gunfire, but to radios. Behind them, somewhere out of sight, American artillery batteries are already in place. Survey teams worked through the night. Coordinates were checked. Firing tables adjusted for elevation, temperature, humidity. The guns are ready before the first shot is fired. Up the slope, remnants of Italian units and newly arrived German formations brace themselves among stone walls and terraces. An Italian major, Giovanni Rinaldi, recently reassigned after Sicily, watches the valley through binoculars. These Americans, he says to a German liaison officer beside him, they move slowly. The German doesn't reply. Rinaldi lowers the glasses. We will pin them here, he continues. Force them to attack uphill without cover. They won't like it. The German finally speaks. They will not attack first, he says quietly. They will measure. Down below, Weaver's platoon halts. The lieutenant raises a fist. They wait. Minutes pass. Then the first shells arrive. Not at the front. Not where the Americans stand. But behind the Italian line. Explosions tear into roads and switchbacks, supply routes, reserve positions, command posts. Fire walks methodically along the ridgeline, sealing it off like a closing door. Rinaldi's eyes widen. They're cutting us off, he says. Before he can issue orders, the second wave hits, closer now, hammering defensive positions with brutal accuracy. Stone walls crumble. Terraces collapse into clouds of dust. German officers shout for movement. There's nowhere to move. American aircraft roar overhead, diving low through the valleys, bombs slamming into choke points with mechanical precision. Each attack is brief, efficient, gone before return fire can even be aimed. Weaver watches from below as the ridge erupts. Same playbook, someone says. Weaver nods. Different hill. The order finally comes. Advance. The Americans move, not rushing, not reckless, following the edge of destruction like men stepping on a ground that's already been cleared by fire. They encounter resistance. Briefly, a machine gun opens up from a farmhouse. 30 seconds later, a shell punches through the roof. Silence. Weaver reaches the first terrace and finds abandoned positions. Equipment dropped mid-task. They didn't even finish setting up, a GI says. Rinaldi stumbles downslope, ears ringing, uniform torn. He watches American infantry fan out below him, tanks grinding forward wherever the terrain allows. This is the moment it fully sinks in. The Americans are not slowed by difficult ground. They simplify it. Every hill becomes a firing solution. Every village a coordinate. Every defense a math problem already solved. Rinaldi thinks back to the jokes, the arrogance, the certainty that Americans would falter once comfort was stripped away. He almost laughs. Comfort has nothing to do with it. What he's facing now is an army that treats violence like logistics and logistics like destiny. By midday, the ridge is lost. By evening, the road inland is open. And with every mountain crossed under relentless firepower, one truth spreads through Italian ranks faster than any order. This enemy does not get tired. This enemy does not improvise. This enemy arrives prepared. September 14th, 1943. 17:36 hours. Outskirts of Salerno beachhead, Italy. The afternoon heat hangs heavy over the valley, pressing down on helmets and shoulders alike. Dust coats everything. Faces, weapons, the olive trees lining the road that snakes inland from the beach. The Salerno landings have held. Barely. And now the counterblows are coming. Staff Sergeant Tom Weaver kneels behind a low stone embankment, rifle resting across his forearms. In front of him, the valley floor stretches wide and exposed. Perfect killing ground. German and Italian units are gathering out there. You can see it in the movement, trucks darting between tree lines, infantry slipping into cover, officers pointing and shouting. For the first time since Sicily, this looks like a real counterattack. Here it comes, someone mutters. Italian Major Giovanni Rinaldi stands with a mixed group of German and Italian troops near a vineyard on the far side of the valley. He hears the engines, sees the build-up, feels the confidence returning, just a little. They are stretched thin, he tells his men. If we push now, hard, we can break them. The order is passed. Men rise. Whistles blow. Units surge forward. For 10 seconds, it looks like momentum. Then the radios crackle on the American side. Targets confirmed. Gridlock. Fire when ready. The valley erupts. Artillery slams down in overlapping patterns. Not a wall this time, but a net. Shells crash into the lead elements, then behind them, then along the flanks. Every attempt to maneuver is met with another burst of steel and fire. Weaver watches the valley disappear behind smoke. That's a lot of guns, he says quietly. His lieutenant doesn't look impressed. That's coordination. Naval gunfire joins in. Heavy shells arcing in from offshore, smashing into assembly areas the Italians never thought were in range. Fighter bombers scream down moments later, strafing survivors already pinned in place. Rinaldi dives into a ditch as the world detonates around him. Men scream. Vehicles burn. Orders dissolve into noise and panic. "This is madness," someone shouts. Rinaldi crawls through dirt and shattered vines, heart pounding. He's fought British units before, even Germans. Nothing like this. There is no pause between blows. No moment where the fire lifts long enough to reorganize. It just keeps coming. On the ridge, Weaver's platoon is ordered forward, not to charge, but to occupy ground already pulverized. They move cautiously, stepping over craters and wreckage, weapons ready. Resistance is scattered, disorganized. A German machine gun opens fire from a hedgerow. Before Weaver can react, a Sherman behind them fires once. The hedgerow vanishes. Weaver stares. "They call us soft," he mutters. "Funny." The lieutenant hears him. "They don't mean weak," he says. "They mean we don't like suffering." He gestures toward the smoking valley. "So we make sure the other guy does all of it." Rinaldi pulls himself upright hours later. Uniform torn, face streaked with ash. The counterattack is gone. Not repelled, erased. He watches American troops consolidating positions calmly. Artillery already shifting to new coordinates. Air cover circling overhead like clockwork. There's no triumph on their faces. Just focus. He thinks back to the old jokes, the smug certainty that Americans wouldn't stomach sustained combat. The truth hits him harder than any shell. They don't stomach it. They eliminate it. As night falls over Salerno, Italian officers pass quiet orders, withdrawals, regrouping, surrender when necessary. The confidence is gone for good now. What stands against them isn't softness. It's an industrial scale of violence, applied patiently, relentlessly, until resistance simply stops existing. And once you see that up close, you don't mock it again. October 3rd, 1943, 22:11 hours. Italian Army Headquarters, near Naples. The room is dim, lit by a single hanging bulb that sways slightly whenever distant artillery rumbles through the hills. Maps of southern Italy cover the walls. Once neat, now scarred with pencil scratches, arrows crossed out, positions abandoned. Italian officers sit in silence. Not the tense silence of waiting for orders, but the heavier kind, when everyone already knows the answer. Major Giovanni Rinaldi stands near the table, helmet under his arm, eyes fixed on a map showing the American advance north from Salerno. Red arrows mark their progress. They move steadily, predictably. Every day, another line shifts forward. An older colonel clears his throat. "We underestimated them," he says at last. No one argues. A month ago, that sentence would have sparked debate, excuses, qualifications, blame. Now it just hangs there, heavy and accepted. Rinaldi speaks quietly. "They do not fight like Europeans," he says. "They fight like engineers." Several officers look up. He continues. "They do not test defenses. They calculate them. They do not probe weakness. They manufacture it." A lieutenant shakes his head slowly. "In Sicily, we said they were lucky," he mutters. "At Salerno, we said they had numbers." Rinaldi taps the map. "In the mountains," he says, "numbers did not matter. Firepower did." Outside, a distant rumble echoes. American artillery practicing night registration. Even in preparation, it sounds methodical. The colonel exhales. "They never rush," he says. "But they never stop." That is the sentence that finally breaks the room. Italian doctrine, like much of Europe's, was built on pauses. Lulls. Moments when fire lifted, when men could regroup, reposition, breathe. The Americans deny all of that. They rotate crews. They shift guns. They replace losses instantly. The pressure never fades. Rinaldi remembers his first encounter with American firepower, how he'd waited for it to end so his men could move. It never did. A staff officer enters quietly with a report. German command requests immediate counteraction north of the Volturno, he says. The colonel doesn't even look at the paper. "With what?" he asks. No one answers. Rinaldi watches the younger officers around the table. These men grew up on stories of Italian valor, Roman legions, decisive clashes. What they face now is something else entirely. An enemy that doesn't seek glory. An enemy that doesn't duel. An enemy that buries opposition under logistics and fire until resistance collapses on its own. Later that night, Rinaldi steps outside. The air is cool, the sky clear. Somewhere far off, American flares pop and fade, marking roads and supply routes. He hears engines, trucks, tanks, endless movement. He thinks of the jokes he once laughed at. The headlines mocking American softness, their love of comfort, their lack of tradition. He understands a mistake now. Comfort isn't weakness. It's efficiency. And efficiency, applied to war, becomes something terrifying. Northward, American forces continue to advance. Not dramatically, not recklessly, but with a steady inevitability that feels impossible to stop. Rinaldi lights a cigarette with shaking hands. They don't need to scare us, he murmurs to himself. They don't need to hate us. They just keep going. And in that realization, something fundamental shifts inside the Italian command. Mockery dies. Respect takes its place. And once respect arrives, defeat is never far behind. November 15th, 1943. 7:04 hours. Volturno River line, Italy. Morning fog clings to the river like a living thing, rolling low over the water and swallowing the opposite bank. The Volturno should be a natural barrier. Muddy banks, limited crossings, perfect ground for a defensive stand. On paper, Staff Sergeant Tom Weaver tightens the strap on his helmet and peers through the haze. Somewhere beyond the fog, Italian and German units dig in, convinced this line will finally slow the Americans down. They always say that, Weaver mutters. Behind him, American engineers are already at work. Bailey Bridge sections lie stacked neatly along the road. Bulldozers idle. Artillery sits registered, barrels angled with quiet confidence. No rush, no drama, just preparation. Across the river, Major Giovanni Rinaldi watches through binoculars, heart sinking. He recognizes the signs now. The Americans aren't probing. They aren't bluffing. They're setting up a process. German officers nearby argue over timing, when to open fire, when to reveal positions. Rinaldi doesn't join in. He knows how this goes. The fog lifts slightly. Artillery opens up, not randomly, but surgically. Shells slam into known observation posts, command nodes, and reserve trenches. Each explosion lands exactly where men would naturally gather. Rinaldi flinches. They mapped us, he says. The Germans finally open fire. American infantry doesn't charge. They wait. Engineers push forward under covering smoke, assembling bridge sections with assembly line speed. When machine guns open up, counter-battery fire answers in seconds. A German officer shouts, "Suppress that crossing." Another artillery strike erases the position. Weaver watches the bridge take shape under fire, hands moving fast, rehearsed calm. Rounds splash into the river nearby, but the men don't stop. They don't build courage into us, Weaver says quietly. They build procedures. Once the bridge is in place, armor rolls across immediately. Tanks fan out on the far bank, guns already firing, clearing space before infantry even steps onto the planks. The crossing doesn't feel like a gamble. It feels like a foregone conclusion. Rinaldi retreats downslope as American shells begin falling behind his line again, cutting off withdrawal routes, isolating pockets. He feels something worse than fear now. Predictability. He knows where the next shells will land before they do. He knows the rhythm. He knows the Americans will not stop once they start. By afternoon, the Volturno line is gone. Not broken. Bypassed, suppressed, neutralized, like a faulty component removed from machine. American units push north with methodical speed, artillery leapfrogging forward, air support rotating overhead on schedule. Weaver pauses on the far bank, looking back at the river. Thought this was supposed to slow us, a GI says. Weaver shrugs. Everything's supposed to, he replies. Nothing ever does. Behind them, trucks roll forward carrying more shells, more fuel, more bridge parts. Ahead of them, new lines are already being measured. Rinaldi watches from a distance, uniform dusty, posture slumped. The war he learned, the one of daring, pauses, and decisive stands, has disappeared. In its place is something colder. A war run like a factory, and once war becomes mechanical, human resistance wears out first. December 1st, 1943. 1849 hours. German Field Headquarters, Central Italy. The room is carved out of an old stone villa, shutters closed tight, maps pinned to the walls with hurried precision. A pot-belly stove ticks softly in the corner, fighting off the winter chill creeping down from the Apennines. German officers crowd around a long table. Their uniforms are neat, their posture rigid, but the confidence that once filled rooms like this is missing. A major from the Wehrmacht intelligence staff points at a map marked with thick blue arrows. The Americans advanced 12 kilometers in 4 days, he says, through terrain we classified as restrictive. A colonel folds his arms. That should not be possible without heavy losses. The major nods. It would be, if losses mattered. The room goes quiet. Major Giovanni Rinaldi, now attached as an Italian liaison, stands off to the side. He says nothing. He doesn't need to. He's already learned the lesson the hard way. The German colonel exhales sharply. Our reports from Sicily describe them as inexperienced, he says. Overconfident. Too dependent on equipment. Rinaldi finally speaks. That is correct, he says evenly. They are dependent on equipment. Several heads turn, and they have more of it than you can destroy. The colonel frowns. You're saying their strength is logistics? Rinaldi nods. And coordination. And patience. A younger German captain scoffs. Patience doesn't win wars. Rinaldi meets his gaze. It does, he says, when it is backed by artillery that never stops. The major gestures toward another report. Every American advance follows the same pattern, he says. Reconnaissance. Registration fire. Suppression. Advance. Immediate consolidation. He taps the paper. They do not improvise under pressure. They prepare until pressure is unnecessary. The German colonel rubs his temples. Our doctrine relies on forcing the enemy into mistakes, he mutters. And they don't make many, Rinaldi replies. Outside, artillery booms in the distance. American guns practicing registration for tomorrow. Even in preparation, the sound carries authority. Back at the front, Staff Sergeant Tom Weaver cleans his rifle by lantern light, boots propped against a crate. Around him, his platoon settles in for the night with practiced efficiency. Germans are supposed to be tough, a GI says. Weaver nods. They are, he replies. Just not tougher than this. He gestures vaguely behind them, toward the endless columns of trucks, the gun lines stretching beyond sight, the aircraft droning overhead even after dark. You don't beat that by being brave, he adds. You beat it by stopping it. No one laughs, because no one believes it can be stopped. In the German headquarters, the colonel straightens. We need a delay, he says. Buy time. The major hesitates. With respect, sir, delay only gives them more time to set conditions. Rinaldi watches the exchange, a strange calm settling over him. This is the moment he recognizes completely. The Germans are no longer mocking the Americans. They're studying them. And study means fear. Because once an army like this is understood, once its methods are clear, the conclusion becomes unavoidable. This isn't an enemy that collapses. It isn't an enemy that panics. It's an enemy that arrives prepared and keeps arriving. Weaver finishes cleaning his rifle and sets it aside. He looks out across the darkened valley, listening to the distant thunder of guns that never seem to sleep. Somewhere ahead, German and Italian officers are still searching for a way to crack this force. He almost feels sorry for them, because the truth has already caught up. The Americans aren't winning because they fight harder. They're winning because they don't stop. And once even the Germans stop laughing, the war has only one direction left to go. January 22nd, 1944. 3:14 hours. Anzio beachhead, Italy. The sea is rough, slate gray under a moonless sky. Landing craft slap against the waves as they grind toward the narrow strip of sand below the coastal bluffs. Engines rumble low. Men crouch in silence, faces tight, breath slow. Staff Sergeant Tom Weaver grips the cold edge of the craft, feeling the vibration travel up his arms. He's been here before. North Africa, Sicily, Salerno. Different beach. Same feeling. Only now, nobody is joking about Americans being soft. The ramp drops. Men spill out into knee-deep water, boots splashing, rifles held high. There's gunfire, but it's scattered, hesitant. The defenders are still trying to understand what's happening. They don't get much time. Offshore, American cruisers and destroyers unleash hell. Naval guns roar in controlled salvos, shells screaming overhead before detonating into the hills above Anzio. Each blast punches the night apart, lighting the cliffs in violent flashes. Weaver hits the sand and moves fast. The ground trembles under him, not from enemy fire, but from American steel. Behind the beach, Italian and German defenders scramble in confusion. Major Giovanni Rinaldi, now serving under German command, stumbles from a dugout as the first shells smash into the bluff line. He knows the sound instantly. Naval guns. He doesn't bother shouting orders. They've already chosen the targets, he mutters. Positions vanish. Communication trenches collapse. Any attempt to move draws immediate response. Shells, then aircraft, then more shells. This isn't a fight for ground. It's a demonstration. On the beach, Weaver advances past shattered obstacles and stunned prisoners. Some Italians have already thrown down their weapons, hands raised, eyes wide. One of them looks at Weaver and says something in broken English. "You have too much fire." Weaver doesn't argue. By dawn, the beachhead is secure. Guns roll ashore. Ammunition stacks grow. Radios chatter nonstop as artillery units register targets deeper inland. The Americans don't rush. They entrench. They bring in more guns. Rinaldi watches from a distance as the pattern repeats itself with terrifying familiarity. He recognizes every phase now. The quiet setup, the registration fire, the sudden, overwhelming pressure. This isn't courage meeting courage. This is capacity meeting resistance. German officers argue nearby, frustrated by the lack of progress. "They're sitting still," one shouts. "Why do they not advance?" Rinaldi turns to him. "Because they don't need to," he says. They are turning the ground into their ally. True to form, when the American advance finally comes, it does so behind walls of fire so dense the defenders barely have time to react. Weaver moves inland again, passing craters still smoking, shattered vehicles half buried in sand. "This place talks different," a GI says. "Like the guns are doing all the talking." Weaver nods. That's the language now. At Anzio, any remaining illusion dies completely. There is no mocking left, no underestimation, no jokes about softness. Only the growing understanding that the Americans have found a way to wage war where hesitation is unnecessary and resistance is unsustainable. Because once firepower becomes the language, everything else goes quiet. February 16th, 1944. 9:27 hours. Near Monte Cassino, Italy. The monastery sits high above the valley, ancient stone clinging to the mountain like it has for centuries. From a distance, it looks untouchable, thick walls commanding height, history itself baked into the rock. To Italian officers watching from below, it once seemed like the perfect anchor. Sacred ground, strong ground, ground that would force the Americans into hesitation. Staff Sergeant Tom Weaver lies prone behind a rock outcrop, staring up at the silhouette of Monte Cassino against a pale winter sky. The air is cold, sharp enough to sting the lungs. Below him, the valley floor is a maze of trenches, craters, and wrecked armor. "You think they'll really hit it?" a GI whispers. Weaver doesn't answer. He hears the sound first. A distant, rising roar. Engines. Not tanks. Aircraft. Dozens of them. Above the monastery, Allied bombers appear in tight formation, sunlight glinting off their wings. For a heartbeat, everything seems suspended. Then the bombs fall. The mountain shakes, as if struck by a giant hand. Stone erupts. Centuries-old walls collapse into clouds of dust and smoke that billow down the slopes. The ground trembles so hard Weaver feels it through his ribs. Behind the lines, Major Giovanni Rinaldi watches in stunned silence. He crosses himself instinctively, not from piety, but from shock. They destroyed it, someone murmurs. Rinaldi nods slowly. Yes, he says, because it was in the way. That is the final lesson. Nothing, terrain, tradition, history, slows this enemy once a position is designated as an obstacle. Artillery follows the bombing with merciless precision. Shells rain down in steady rhythm, pounding the slopes where defenders try to reorganize amid the ruins. Any movement draws immediate response. Weaver rises and moves with his squad as the barrage creeps forward. The fire is so dense it feels like the mountain itself is being peeled apart layer by layer. Italian and German defenders fight back where they can, but coordination is gone. Radios are silent. Command posts erased. Rinaldi retreats downslope, boots slipping on loose rubble. He watches men scatter, some wounded, some dazed, some simply giving up. He feels no anger now, only clarity. This is the breaking point, not just of a line, but of belief. Belief that courage can offset firepower. Belief that terrain can cancel numbers. Belief that Americans will eventually tire. They do not. They rotate. They resupply. They return. Weaver reaches a shattered wall and pauses, chest heaving. He looks up at the ruined monastery looming above. Guess nothing's off limits, he mutters. His lieutenant nods grimly. When stops the guns, he says it stops existing. By afternoon, the position is no longer defensible. Resistance collapses in fragments. The road north opens, slowly, brutally, but permanently. Rinaldi stands among the ruins as American units consolidate positions, artillery already shifting to the next ridgeline. He thinks back to the early days of the war, the jokes, the confidence, the belief that Americans were too soft for real fighting. The irony cuts deep. They weren't soft. They were methodical. And method, applied without restraint, breaks things that brute force never could. As dusk settles over Cassino, Weaver watches the guns quiet for the first time all day. Tomorrow, they'll start again. Somewhere else. Because once the breaking point is reached, there's no going back. June 4th, 1944. 6:18 hours. Outskirts of Rome, Italy. Morning light spills across the ancient roadways leading into Rome, illuminating shattered vehicles, abandoned weapons, and the quiet signs of a retreat that no one is trying to hide anymore. The city itself looms ahead, scarred, tense, but spared the destruction that consumed so many other places. The guns are quiet. For the first time in months, the silence feels heavier than the noise ever did. Staff Sergeant Tom Weaver walks slowly along the roadside, helmet tucked under his arm, boots crunching over debris. His unit advances cautiously, but there's no resistance. No ambush. No last stand. It's done, someone says behind him. Weaver nods, eyes scanning windows and rooftops out of habit. Inside a battered staff car parked beneath a line of trees, Major Giovanni Rinaldi sits motionless, hands folded in his lap. His uniform is worn thin, insignia dulled by dust and time. Around him, other Italian officers wait quietly, expressions hollow. No orders are coming. Rinaldi steps out of the car as American infantry approach, rifles lowered but ready. An officer moves forward, calm, professional. "Major," the American asks. Rinaldi nods. "We will not resist," he says evenly. There is no purpose left in it. The American officer studies him for a moment, then gestures for his men to stand down. It is over. As columns of Allied troops move past, Rinaldi watches them closely. There is no triumphal shouting, no gloating. The soldiers look tired, focused, already thinking about what comes next. That is what unsettles him most. This army doesn't linger in victory. It transitions. Weaver watches prisoners being processed efficiently, water handed out, wounds treated, names taken. No shouting, no chaos, just procedure. He remembers the early days, the headlines, the ridicule, the certainty that Americans would break once the fighting became ugly. Instead, they built a way of fighting where ugliness was controlled. Firepower absorbed fear. Coordination replaced desperation. Logistics erased hesitation. Rinaldi watches artillery units roll past, guns already cleaned, crews rotating like clockwork. They will fight the next war the same way, he murmurs. Weaver overhears him as he passes. Hope not, Weaver says quietly. But if they do, nobody's laughing. Rinaldi meets his eyes and nods. That laughter died in Sicily, he replies. Rome falls not with a final battle, but with a realization, shared now on both sides, that the outcome was decided long before this moment. Not by one charge, not by one stand, but by relentless, layered firepower applied until resistance no longer made sense. As American flags rise over government buildings, Weaver pauses and looks back south toward the hills and valleys they fought through. They called us soft, he says to himself. He thinks of the guns that never stopped, the planes that always arrived, the way every position eventually dissolved under pressure. Soft things bend. This force did not bend. It pressed forward until the mockery was buried beneath rubble, smoke, and silence. And when the war in Italy finally fades into memory, that is what remains. Not the jokes, not the speeches, but the understanding, shared by friend and foe alike, that once American firepower arrived in full, there was no way to laugh it off.